Thank you for this opportunity to present to you the special report on strengthening the capacity of the internal security forces in Niger and Mali. Niger and Mali are fragile states in Western Africa, young democracies with weak economies and developing public administrations. In 2011, the EU adopted a strategy for security and development in the Sahel region based on the premise that development and security are mutually supportive and the issues faced in the Sahel region require a regional answer. The EU uses civilian, common security and defence policy missions and military operations, as well as other EU instruments to implement its Sahel strategy. The EU set up the missions in Niger and Mali to respond to the threats to the development and internal security of the Sahel region and to the security of the EU. The aim was to help strengthen the capacity of the national forces responsible for internal security by providing training, advice and equipment. Council set up UCAP Sahel Niger in 2012 to support the capacity building of the security actors to fight terrorism and organized crime. And in 2015, the EU member states expanded the mission's role and mandate to include assisting in exercising control and fighting, as well as gathering information about irregular migration. Likewise, Council set up UCAP Sahel Mali in 2014 to allow the Malian authorities to restore and maintain constitutional and democratic order, and the conditions for lasting peace in Mali, and to restore and maintain state authority and legitimacy throughout the territory of Mali by means of an effective redeployment of its administration. Money-wise, Council has approved €69 million for UCAP Sahel Niger between 2012 and 2017, and €66 million for UCAP Sahel Mali between 2014 and 2017. Our objective in our audit was to examine how the UCAP Sahel missions were set up and managed, how they operated, and whether they succeeded in strengthening the capacity of the forces responsible for the internal security in the two countries. To do so, we asked two questions. Did the EEAS plan and implement the UCAP Sahel missions well? And the second question was, have the UCAP Sahel missions strengthened the capacity of the security forces in Niger and Mali? So what did we find? Well, overall, we concluded that the missions contributed towards strengthening the capacity of the forces responsible for internal security, but that progress was slowed by the challenging context in which they worked and by operational inefficiencies. And please allow me to go through some of the main findings and conclusions in our audit. The operational efficiency was negatively affected by a combination of two-year mandates, annual budgets, and a high number of staff vacancies. We found that the mission staff did not receive adequate practical guidance, and in the case of Niger, pre-deployment training. The EEAS and the Commission did not provide enough support and in some cases applied procedures that were unsuited to the working conditions on the ground. Let me give you a few examples from the audit. Because the mission to Niger was set up so quickly, the logistical and operational arrangements were not in place from the beginning. It took 18 months for the mission to become a legal entity, so the head of mission had to sign all documents in his own name, and therefore he bore the financial and legal responsibility. In addition, the mission did not have a budget allocated for the set-up phase. The mission had a slow start in carrying out activities because they only received little administrative and logistical support from Brussels. In Niger, this was not limited to the set-up phase, but it continued in the subsequent years of operations. In the 6 projects we audited, purchased equipment arrived long after the training courses for which it had been intended had actually taken place. In 5 cases, staff had requested equipment or drawn up specifications for a contract, and the staff had left by the time the goods arrived. Newly recruited staff had to take over projects and procedures without having the necessary training, which led to implementing delays in the mission's operations. In addition, we found many of the staff responsible for identifying projects and preparing technical specifications were not sufficiently aware of EU procedures and rules before they arrived to the missions. This led to delays in procurement procedures and cancelled contracts. Another example concerns the training provided to the internal security forces. Due to weak administrative procedures, the mission in Niger was unable to provide us with full documentations for half of the training courses, such as proof of attendance or course evaluation forms completed by the participants. The mission in Mali performed well in this respect. When we visited the regional operational center in the city of Agadesh in Niger, we found that although the mission had supplied equipment to the center, it was actually not operational. There were no chairs in the center's room, half of the tables were missing, and the air conditioning was not working. The beneficiaries could not show us the computer that had been provided, the printer did not function because there was no toner, and the equipment installed for radio communication was not working. 2 vehicles, which should have been at the disposal of the center to enable it to respond quickly to emergencies, had hardly ever been used. One of them was damaged beyond repair and had been so since 2014. So, on sustainability, we found that the missions worked towards making their missions sustainable, but with little success. Despite the positive view of the missions, the governments in the 2 countries were not always ready to adopt the appropriate legislation and pass some of the necessary reforms for the result of the capacity building to be sustained. In Mali, the situation was made worse by the lack of political stability and organizational deficiencies at government level. This undermined the mission's effort to make the results of their activities sustainable. However, the missions were also responsible for their own weak performance in ensuring sustainability. For example, neither mission verified the success of the provided support by checking how the knowledge gained on training courses or received equipment was used. The missions did also not collect information on whether internal security staff continued to work in the areas for which they were trained after the courses had been completed, or whether the trainees had understood and used the knowledge that was acquired during the training. Even though the missions are not intended to be permanent features in the countries, there are no clear exit strategy. On a more encouraging note, when we interviewed the beneficiaries of the mission's training, advice and equipment, and a variety of stakeholders in internal security in Niger and Mali, the overall assessment of the activities carried out by the missions was positive. Stakeholders and beneficiaries appreciated the availability of mission staff to give advice or to produce services that were not available from the national sources. In Niger, the security forces and government representatives pointed to the value of the mission's longer-term presence compared with that of many other donors. Both missions also provided information and advice in support of other EU instruments and the wider activities of the EU and its member states. For example, the missions contributed to the design of the EU Trust Fund for Africa projects, they gathered information on migratory flows, and they mapped EU activities connected with migration. Donors And stakeholders in Niger and Mali also highlighted the important role played by both missions in coordinating activities in the security sector. Both missions set up bodies to improve coordination with the national authorities, which initially experienced problems but were now broadly successful. They also set up good mechanisms for coordination and cooperation with other donors and stakeholders. So based on this audit, what do we then recommend? The Court of Auditors recommend that the EEAS and the Commission should take measures to improve the operational efficiency of the missions, to improve the occupancy rate of staff posts on the missions, to set mandates and budget to match operations and provide for an exit strategy, increase the focus on sustainability, and finally, improve indicators, monitoring and evaluation. The EEAS and the Commission have accepted all 5 of our recommendations in the audit report, and I now look forward to seeing the recommendations being implemented for the benefit of the internal security situation in the region as well as the EU. So thank you very much for your attention. I will be happy to answer your question on this report. Thank you, Chair.